Well, welcome everybody. I think maybe we'll get started. There might be a few more people joining us. We're really excited to be here today for this fireside chat. Jose and Dr. Ashley and I have been working together in a number of different ways, but particularly through the Black Girls Equity Alliance and our collaborations. So we had a chance to talk about what we thought would be helpful to share at the summit this year. And I think one of the things that really stood out for all of us was the way in which we have really valued collaborations across different disciplines, and how that's really allowed us to think more innovatively about our work to really support Black girls' health and wellness. So I'm super excited to be here to talk to y'all today. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Dr. Brittany Brinkman. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm an associate professor of psychology at Point Park University.
Hey. Hi, my name is Jose Garth. I'm the community education coordinator at Gwen's Girls. And as Dr. Brinkman brought up, I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Brittany and Dr. Ashley for a number of years now, and it's been really great, as well as some other collaborators that in the room or co-conspirators in this room. I saw Tasha jump up earlier. I'm sure there's some others in here as well.
Great. So I'm Dr. Ashley Hill. I'm an assistant professor in epidemiology at the Graduate School of Public Health at Pitt. And yeah, I have to echo everything that both Dr. Brittany and Jose have said. It's been really great to get a chance to collaborate with them and to really think about how we can combine our efforts to support Black girls in Pittsburgh, but I think broadly as well. So glad to be here. And navigating the slides, so.
Thank you.
But please let me know if you can't see things. This is a weird interface. I don't see what you see, but I see some things that you see. I don't know, it's weird.
We'll let you know if anything looks weird. What I wanted to share was a little bit of sort of big picture, and then I'll talk about some of the specific projects that I've been part of in the Black Girls Equity Alliance. But I've really been thinking a lot about the work and how I approach doing community-based work, and the values that I bring into that, and really what guides me throughout the project. And when I talk about some of our projects, they really range in what the problem was that we were trying to address, and the strategies that we took to try to address that problem, and the kinds of outcomes or products that have come of it. But there are definitely some pieces that, for me, really guide how I approach all of these things. So the first thing for me is, I think it's really important to exercise reflexivity. So this is a term you may or may not have heard of. It's something we use a lot in the psychology realm, and in the realm of like doing research. And it's really a form of reflecting. So as a psychologist and as a researcher, the first piece really is for me to be always cultivating awareness of myself, like who I am as a person, how that shows up in my work. So, thinking about coming in as a white woman into the space, focusing on how to lift up the experiences of Black girls, change our systems so that they are better spaces for our Black girls to be in. It matters, right? Like the ways in which my whiteness shows up in the space, the ways in which being a woman shows up in the space, the ways in which being trained as a psychologist, being a professor show up in the space. And then thinking about, as a group, how do we do reflexivity together? So if we're working on a project, talking about what are we bringing into the space, I have learned so much from my collaborators, and I know that people have strengths that I don't have, right? And I want them to bring those in and draw on those strengths. We are better together as a team. And then also being able to talk about when things are going really well and when things aren't going well, right? When a conflict comes up, maybe amongst the group, how do we work through that? When we are dealing with some problem and we're hitting walls, when we were working on a project, we were working on a project to address street harassment, and then the pandemic hit, and who would have thought that anything could ever make street harassment like rare for a short period of time, right? Like didn't totally go away, but it wasn't the top thing we had to deal with suddenly. So how do we be in a space where we're talking to each other about our collaborations so that we can really adapt as needed as things are happening? And then for me, I think it's really important that I'm always centering like the local context and the expertise of community members, right? So if I think about doing research within a particular community, that what I know as a psychologist is some, I bring some expertise in, but the expertise of the community members, the expertise of the people living that experience has to be the center, right? So we always center the lived experiences of Black girls in our work in the Black Girls Equity Alliance. That the ways to come in and say, even for research studies, to have designed those by asking Black girls, what questions should we be asking, right? Not just what do I think or what have other psychologists thought is the way to go here. And then I think it's really important thinking about like the local context of things as well. So I've been living in Pittsburgh for 12 years now. I didn't grow up here. I love Pittsburgh, but I'm not a native. And I know that there's so much to the history here that I've worked to learn, but that I won't ever fully understand as a person that didn't live here at certain points in time. So knowing that the context is really important, and that I need those collaborators for whom that is their lived experience. The next piece for me is really thinking about structural change, right? And, you've probably heard this theme throughout the summit. It was definitely a theme in the keynote today. Our goal is not to change Black girls, right? Our goal is to change the systems that Black girls are existing within that are causing problems. So always kind of coming in with that lens, I think is really important to me. And then fostering interdependence. So this is something that I've really been informed from Adrienne Marie Brown's work. She talks about how to do social movement work. And for me, as a researcher, kind of put in quotes, coming into collaborations, what is it that I can bring to the collaboration, and what is it that I need from the collaboration? So Adrienne Marie Brown says that interdependence is fostered by generosity and vulnerability, right? So what am I giving? And giving without strings attached is generosity, right? And vulnerability is like, what is it that I'm really willing to say I need and to ask for? And I think that typically collaborations with universities or researchers are not interdependent, right? Oftentimes people like me go into spaces and take. We say we're giving, but we're not. We're actually taking, right? We come in, we take things from the community, and then we leave. But we say we're helping the community. And there's not generosity. There's strings attached to what we say we're giving. And rarely, I think, are universities or researchers vulnerable. Are we honest about what is it that I need from this? And what is it that I'm asking for? And what do I need from other people, right? So for me, I think that interdependence is crucial. I lost the slides there. And then the last one is, for me, thinking about collaborative adaptation. So again, I've mentioned this a little bit, but I think we can come up with projects and things that we want to do. And then, the world happens, right? So we were working on a bunch of stuff in the Black Girls Equity Alliance when the pandemic hit, and we shifted and figured out what are the priorities. And we really worked with Kathy to help develop a tutoring program, right? It wasn't on the agenda of what needed to happen, and it really needed to happen in March of 2020, right? So really being able to adapt. And I think the reason that we're able to do that is because we talk about what our shared goals are, like what's important to us, what is it that we value. It's not any one project. No, one of these projects is going to solve the problems, right? And so when we have a sense of what our goals are and what our values are on a deeper level, we can more quickly adapt to changing circumstances and not just get stuck on like, if this one thing doesn't turn out the way we planned, then, we just throw our hands up, right? We're able to shift and move as things come up. So next slide, Ashley. So I'm not going to say a ton about this. We can talk about if people have questions, or Jose, if there's things you want to talk about. Most of these we've worked on together. And then also just a plug for our later session in the Health and Wellness Working Group. A lot of these have come out of that, but I want to just say a little bit like the range of things for me and why it's really important. So from like creating the curriculum for the Black Girls Advocacy and Leadership Alliance to doing culturally responsive mental health teacher training, more traditional research studies, creating a learning community for people about trauma-informed care. So part of what's been amazing to me is getting to really create what is needed by the group, right? So for me, it's not just coming in and saying, well, I'm going to just do a bunch of research projects. Sometimes we've needed research projects, sometimes we've needed program development, other things that have happened. And then just a little bit about kind of where we've gone with things. So we've put out reports through the Black Girls Equity Alliance. We've published peer-reviewed articles, presented at kind of more traditional conferences, really thinking about how we can like talk about the work that we're doing, including talking about how the Black Girls Equity Alliance works and some of these principles, and really encouraging collaborators in other spaces. For me, really trying to help other people who are positioned as researchers or positioned within universities to think about how they're doing community-based work differently and hopefully less harmfully, by like sharing not just here's a specific project, but like here is how we went about doing the collaboration.
I was muted. I apologize. I'm going to jump in on and off camera throughout this. I'm having like the worst allergies today. I don't want to submit y'all to my like what's happening on my face at moments, but hopefully I won't have a sneezing attack through this. So I've been focused on youth development work since I was a youth. In the good old days, they weren't that great actually back then. The days that was, the youth were great, I'm sure. But I've really done a lot of focus on kind of these kinds of support over the last few years, around sexual and reproductive health. And I really fell in love with teaching sex ed and this sexual health framework. Part of the reason why is just because it's such a universal topic. I feel there's always a lot of pushback, no matter what age group I work in early on when we have sessions, because a lot of people are just like, well, I have a body, I know, or like, especially when I work with adults, right? It's like, I got 3 kids. What are you going to tell me about sexuality? And it's like, well, there's lots of things because it's a lifelong process. And dealing with some of the truths that we all have as far as human beings go is just so fascinating and interesting and exciting to me. I love being able to share that in conversation and community with other folks. So what I mean by these universal truths of being a human being, or we all have bodies, right? And all of our bodies are different, but we all have bodies, right? So we can't deny that, like, as a human being, you know, we're not specters just floating around like Casper, the friendly ghost. Really sad story, by the way. That's a cartoon about a dead kid, which is very sad. But sorry, I digress. We all have bodies, right? All of our bodies change, right? It continues to change throughout our lifetime. There's not a point, you know, we get past puberty and it's done, or, you know, menopause and then it's all over. Our bodies continue to change, you know, and teaching people how to build that relationship with themselves, because relationships is a big part of us as human beings and our sexuality, a relationship with others, but also a relationship with ourselves, you know. And this is one of the things I really love about being able to engage in this topic and this framework, is that it allows me to do my own kind of work on myself while I'm on the clock, right? I get to kind of ask these same questions, like, how do I listen to my body? How do I hear a clear yes and a clear no from myself? And then how do I hear that from my friends and family members and romantic partners or whoever else I may be in relationship with in my life, right? And, you know, this communication, right? How do I communicate to others? How do I communicate to myself? You know, I really love Dr. Diaz Johnson, I believe, I'm so bad with names, that following joy and centering joy is like so great. You know, Brittany really put you down, like Adrienne Marie Brown, and that kind of pleasure activism, right? How do we chase down that joy and not be a part of it? And I think, you know, when looking at these 3 kinds of support, you know, this kind of middle support of just like actual, like, real world resources, right? So around sexual health, we're looking at places where people can access birth control, access legal safe abortion, that can access STI testing, STD testing, or whatever it may be, right? Those real world things are so important, but also some of these intangible things are a little bit less measurable, right? Because we don't have a lot of good tools to measure joy. And, you know, I feel like there's a lot of researchers in this room, so maybe y'all can tell me about these tools that do exist, and I'd love to hear about them. But like, it's not one of the key measurements we often look at, right? We're not often looking at, you know, people's real satisfaction and what success means to them as a measure of this, especially when we talk about sexuality, because we tie it up into, do you have STDs, or do you have any unintended pregnancies? And those are our markers of health. And I'm sure Dr. Hill will get into this a bit on her piece as well, of trying to how do we make that more expansive? So, you know, we're giving those more tangible things, but also we're having these conversations about love and joy and personal satisfaction, because they're so essential to us as human beings and to our sexuality and to our general well-being. And the other piece, you know, is really supporting these students these young folks as students, but also adult learners as well, right? Parents, caregivers, community members who are all stakeholders, but we are all stakeholders in this, whether we want to be or not, right? Whether you got kids, whether you're an auntie, or whether you're just a neighbor to somebody's kid, whatever, we're all here together and it all affects us. So how do we build a community of askable adults that can have these tough conversations and know when they can have a tough conversation and say, like, actually, it's a little bit out of my comfort zone, you know, why don't you talk to Dr. Hill, or why don't you talk to Dr. Brinkman, right? There's other people in community that we can kind of use, because we can't be it all for everybody. So these are kind of the things that I've really focused on over the last 10 years, I think. If we can go to the next slide. And as part of it, this is just my kind of compass that I use sometimes. I'm not going to go through and read all these. You can, I'm sure, or I hope you're all able to read these. This actually comes from the I'm forgetting the organization now, Center for Sex Ed, and I really like these principles. They mean a lot to me, but also I'm somebody who's worked in this field a long time, and you know, my untrusting, pessimistic eye often picks up things because I'm always just on alert. I'm just like, all right, like, who's not running things right? And one thing when we look at comprehensive sex ed and some of these approaches is, it's often very white-led. It's often these large institutions that are predominantly white institutions that are taking on this work, and not because there's not Black folks who want to do this work, but one, a lot of Black folks aren't even exposed to it, right? So, you know, personally myself, you know, I was once a young Black boy. I've grown a little bit over the years, but I didn't get any quality sex ed growing up, so I didn't even know this was like a thing that people did, right? You know, you got to see it to be it. Not even being exposed to it at all, people don't get to get into it. And so often we see research and different things that are being done for people of color, right? BIPOC folks, right? People love putting that in their grants, but they don't like putting Black folks in the leadership positions to run these programs. Which is why it's been so great to have Dr. Hill as a collaborator over the years. And I hope that continue to be a collaborator, because it's just so nice to be able to do work in Black communities with Black folks in leadership, right? Because a lot of things get missed when we don't do that. And I can tell you, I've read a lot of grants, I've worked on a lot of grants, and a lot of things get missed when you take, you know, Black folks out of these leadership positions. So, you know, even in these principles of sexuality education, you know, there's some level of diversity that they speak of inside of here, but they don't talk a lot about, you know, there's not an explicit, you know, racial aspect to this, right? You know, which I think needs to be said and needs to be named, because we are all of our identities. I don't get to just be, you know, just a man today. I don't get to just be, you know, just cisgender today or whatever it is. I have to carry all of my identities with me at all times. And like, whether I want people to read them or not, I'm being read certain ways. So, you know, making sure that when we're engaging in these conversations, that we're not doing it in this kind of one size fits all, because when it's one size fits all, what it's really saying is, you know, it's the default white approach to things. And, you know, which will still hit on some good things, because we do have a lot of things in common, right? You know, once again, white folks have bodies, Black folks have bodies. We still have a lot of commonalities, but we know culturally there's a lot of differences. So, you know, there's some of the things that have really been a part of my focus, and I will pass it on to you, Dr. Hill, to expand on these things as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, you know, everything that both Jose and Dr. Brinkman have talked about have been obviously really integral to kind of the perspective that I bring. So my work primarily focuses on the indicator, which is not the primary focus at all, but just using sexual health and sexually transmitted infections as an indicator of how well we're doing around education, how well we're doing around prevention. And so as Jose mentioned, I think what's important that we've learned is that just harping on this idea of don't get an STD or, you know, use a condom doesn't always necessarily translate into, you know, reduced incidence, nor does it really translate into the most effective ways to talk about healthy bodies and healthy sexuality. And that is actualized through the data. And so, what I'm showing here, and as an epidemiologist, I have to bring you the numbers, but I won't stay there. But what I'm showing you here is just some of the rates from Allegheny County regarding chlamydia cases from 2018. And so, one thing that has continuously driven my work, and again brought me to this space, is that STIs are highly clustered in young women, and particularly Black young women. And so while we understand that disparity, we recognize that an individual's race is not the driver of disparity, but all of the underlying systems that prevent them from getting what they need, which is why we're all here. So again, I'm just sort of pointing this out to provide context, but I think a lot of where my work is going towards, in some of the places that I am looking forward to continuing to collaborate with both Dr. Brinkman and Jose and the Black Girls Equity Alliance, is around understanding how to contextualize structural inequity in the form of racism and the form of various forms of oppression, and how a lot of our work has really centered around the experiences of violence and harassment, particularly for girls and women locally, and how that has translated into adverse reproductive outcomes or adverse health and wellness outcomes overall. And so one of the things that I really like to do, and opportunities that I have to talk about this work, is really show the direct connections between the historical implications of our lived experiences as Black bodies in the United States, and how those things continue to be perpetuated. Again, as Dr. Diaz was talking about earlier, these are things that are intergenerational. They are things that continue across multiple lifespans, and can intensify and really show up as hard outcomes, particularly around our health and our reproductive health. And so, we've obviously been talking quite a bit with the current conversation about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, and really what that meant and the implications that had for untreated syphilis in the Southern United States. But I also think that what is often overlooked in that particular context is the fact that, again, untreated STIs that were left and allowed to kind of run rampant throughout Southern communities really has direct implications to the high rates of STIs that we see now. And again, not a direct connection that most people are able to make. And additionally, the other figure or the photo that I have posted is really talking about history investigation that really demonstrated that, lots of our modern medical techniques, the things that we are regularly having to subject ourselves to just to be healthy, quote unquote, many of these techniques were perfected on non-consenting individuals who were slaves at the time, and really thinking about, again, that intergenerational trauma and some of the things that we hold in our bodies that continue to be sort of this dichotomy of our health and wellness, but have also, really had significant impacts on our abilities to be seen and visible in society, and Black girls and women's ability to be visible in society. So I think it's really important to bring this to the conversation. In any conversation that we're having about health and wellness, we have to think about how individuals who are minority in this country have consistently been overlooked, have been violated, have been harmed for the good of health and wellness. And so I think in order to bring up that narrative, we also have to make sure that we're centering on these experiences, centering on the ability to identify, again, as was stated in the previous presentation. I really like what she said about her daughter being able to say, that's racism in action. Like, I can be able to identify these things. And I think it's really important for our young people, for their own identities, to be able to say and separate societal treatment from their actual, lived experiences, and then their view of themselves. And so, again, this is just a little bit of a depiction of some things that have kind of gone on over the course of our U.S. history, particularly things that have had specific implication for the impacts of reproductive health on Black and Indigenous women as well. So I think to kind of bring it home, some of the collaborative projects that I have contributed on, particularly with BGA, is working to create a survey for health teachers with Pittsburgh Public Schools. We really wanted to be able to assess what teachers are teaching, their comfort level with teaching, comprehensive and correct information. And so we were able to create a survey that was really grounded in some of the major national standards, and to ask them some of the topics that they're supposed to be covering and asking them about whether or not they're comfortable with doing that. And so we have to circle back with them to get those results. But I think that is a start for us to be able to have a conversation in improving the information that's provided, in removing stigma around sex education, but really thinking about how we can make it more comprehensive, how we can make it inclusive, how we can make it more broadly applied to your life, and how, you know, it's important to have healthy relationships, and just how sexuality is an integral part of an individual, and sort of normalizing these conversations. So we're really excited to move forward with that. And then I'm also hoping to continue, again, as we said, several of these collaborations with grant funding, as we've kind of applied for a few things, but really being able to center and uplift some of the people who have been leading this work, such as Jose, such as Tasha, who's in the audience, and making sure that we're able to promote their expertise in meaningful ways, so that everything that we're doing is really grounded and centered in the expertise of all of you. So I think we were gonna go through some questions. I don't know.
Yeah, so but before we even jump into questions, I just want to open up a couple of things to the group. One being, if anybody wants to jump on their camera, it'd be nice to see some of your faces. I'm so congested. I feel horrible right now, and I'd feel so much better if it wasn't just the three of our faces on here. But also, whatever you're comfortable with, by all means. But you know, since we're talking about these kind of cross-cutting approaches, I don't know all the folks that are in this room, but I would love to see some of the other expertise that is in this room and how other folks are doing this work as well. You know, Brittany, Ashley, and I are ready to sit here and talk for the next 40 minutes if need be, but it would be nice to have more of a conversation with other folks as well and kind of see what some of your thoughts are and questions are. So I just want to leave just a little bit of, I mean, as much space, not a little bit, a lot of space for that to happen. But also we're happy to fill the void if that void exists in this next 30 minutes that we have together. Oh, I love when the invitation goes out and people accept. Thank you, Kimberly.
I actually, is it okay if I share something?
Yes, please. It's more than okay. It's welcome.
Okay, so I worked at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh for a number of years, and I managed the gardens there. And so we did a number of cooking classes, and I actually got a grant and partnered with Gwen's Girls many years ago. And we came into their after-school program and taught cooking. And the way that I like to teach cooking is really getting a sense from the young people what they're interested in, what they want to eat, what they want to learn how to make. And so we'd get that direct feedback, and we design the program around that. And, you know, my passion, I'm actually the food justice advocate for Homewood Children's Village currently. And so my main goal is to make sure everyone has plenty of access to nutritious foods, and also has the education that they feel confident preparing them into culturally relevant dishes that they enjoy. And that eating healthy is not a chore. You know, it's something that they actually can take pride and joy in, and that those kids are being raised in households where cooking is a comforting kind of, you know, safe aspect of their existence. So when we talk about health, you know, I directly go to food. If kids are not eating enough protein, if they're eating too much sugar, all of that impacts their ability to thrive. And so I'm just really passionate about empowering youth with cooking skills. And what I also saw was that if they felt empowered to cook, they would go home
and they'd be excited to show that off. And so the families and the adults were really learning through the youth. And the youth have an excitement about it. You know, they've seen people cook and they're often not trusted with knives and things like this to prepare, but we would show them knife skills. And we had middle schoolers who were very safe with the knives. And, you know, we had a 0 tolerance rule. If there was any horseplay, it would just be taken away. And they responded to that. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. I think when we're talking about health, you know, there's a lot of different aspects, and food is certainly one of them.
It sounds like Miss Shannon's trying to bring you over to her site in Clareton. She's actually still doing the cooking classes.
We primarily focus on Homewood, but we should certainly talk. I'd be happy to help you start up a program there.
Yeah, so I would love to continue that conversation, Kimberly, especially to continue to plug the health and wellness that we're doing later on. I think nutrition is such a big part of it. You know, my last organization, one of the things that I really butted heads with people a lot was we were doing STI screenings. And I'm like, while we're here, can we try to see how we can expand and maybe do blood pressure and other things too? And like, oh, well, we're reproductive health and sexual health. And I'm like, well, my heart health is part, you know, like it's not, we try to do everything in silos. Like we're not even the community, but even on the micro, right? Like in our own bodies, we're like, oh, like we're talking about mental health, not heart health. And we're talking, you know, it's like as if I get hit by a car, it's not going to affect my mental health. If I can't get out and walk every day, that it's not going to, you know, or vice versa. And like, I feel that nutrition piece is so big.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you.
I put my email in the chat. So anybody who's in this conversation, I've been teaching cooking and designing gardens for nonprofits and schools for a long time. And I'd be happy to share my experience and connect you with resources so that you can do that in your own programs and communities.
I was just going to sort of add that it's really cool because interventions with children actually have significant impacts on adults, as you know, many of you have stated at this point. But I think it's another sort of, you know, arsenal in our toolkit to think about how are we able to assist families in getting what they need. And sometimes, you know, parents are more willing to allow their children to do activities and things that, you know, obviously they see as safe and non-exploitive when it comes to the research, but really it can often have some unexpected effects on, you know, their ability to see things differently. And I think that came to mind, particularly with the healthy cooking and eating, because I'm sure, you know, parents would want to encourage that in a child that comes home and is excited about being able to prepare meals, which, you know, also like, yes, check, make the food.
What a real life change, right? Because we want to rely on just like diets, right? Like, oh, we're going to go to this fad diet, this fad diet. It's like, no, like we need real change in individuals and their habits and how they approach things, you know? And that's one of the great things about, you know, I said doing sex ed for so long was like, you know, you preach certain things like, you know, like building consent culture and healthy relationships. And then you start looking at your own relationships, you're like, oh, snap, hold on. Like, Dr. Diaz said that too, right? Like we got to do the things that we're talking. I'm like, oh, I got to do all this? Like, ooh, okay. But really like that lifelong changes, right? Like it's not about, you know, I'm not going to eat sugar for 3 weeks. It's like, how do I just eat less sugar day to day for the rest of my life, right? How do I eat less processed foods and things like that? I think that's great.
I don't want to keep talking, but you do bring up another really great point, because I think one of the things that I'm really hoping to do in, you know, the academic space is push for people who are doing work to make sure that they are also embodying that work. And so your real life needs to match up to what you're saying you believe in the grant. And, you know, that's one thing that I think is obviously that's not a metric of success in academia, but I think that it is a metric of success in your actual ability to understand and really make meaningful change. And so not to do work just to do work, but to do work that actually is impacting the lives of the people that you're hoping to serve. And so that's something, and to Jose and I think and Brittany and I have kind of talked about that a lot as well, because I think a lot of times we see, you know, people doing stuff just to do it. And I think that becomes overburdening to our communities. It becomes overburdening to our girls. Like, nobody wants to do something just to do it. I don't want to just do another survey. Like, why are you asking me? But ultimately, that we're able to not only demonstrate it with our, actions in our lives, but also really bring back the improvements that we're saying we want to make in the things that we're asking for.
And I just as something I just like to bring out, folks, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this. Is just, I know one of the things we want to talk about are some of the barriers that we face trying to do this work. And for me, one barrier that keeps on coming up is what's respected and what's not respected when we start talking about certain things, right? So when I'm always like, relationships first, and like some people are like, yes, relationships first. Oh my God, you got to build relationships. And then when you're out there, actually, it's like, like, what'd you do with the kids today? It's like, oh, we did some team building games. Like, well, what about the curriculum? And I'm like, I'm trying to build a relationship, and like, you're doing information first, and like, if a relationship's built through the information, great. And I'm on the other, I'm like, but they're like, well, the funders, and I'm like, I'm not working for the funders. I don't care who gives me money. If I'm in a community, sorry, I just took your money to go work with these kids the way I know I'm supposed to work with these kids. So like, we got problems with that. Let's have that discussion. I'm here for it. I know I'm not perfect. Maybe I'm doing this wrong, but like, but like, how do we value some of these things that, like, I feel so often, we use these words like, we have to empower students to be able to make these changes themselves. We have to give them their self-efficacy, and we have to build these relationships, and we have to center the youth in these conversations. And, which all sounds really good, but there's no like necessarily maybe like a policy or a thing that really points to how that's actually happening. And if you actually do show us how it's happening, how often is it actually respected or just looked at as like, oh, you're just trying to have fun with these kids, which I'm like, yeah, I actually am. And I think that's part of my job as well. You know what I mean? Like, how am I effective at this if it's like lame and dry? Like, I need to, so I'm just wondering what other people's experiences with that kind of like issue of just like the soft skills, I think also is not an accent that's often like things are looked at as feminine, right? Of like relationship building, empathy, vulnerability, these things that, that aren't often respected. And when I say respect, I mean, it's not often paid for in the ways money-wise, in my opinion. So I love your other folks' thoughts on that.
So I'll jump in real quick. Hey, everyone. I heard my name a couple times. So hey, Ashley, hey, Brittany, Jose. As I worked with many of y'all before, I remember first coming into my program, and that was the biggest thing, grants and money, and you had to show and prove. And my biggest thing was about relationship building. So I stated, in order for me to be here this first year, y'all gonna have to figure it out, because I need to build relationships with these kids. I was fortunate enough to have been working with youth for so long that I brought a group of kids over from the many places that I was in, and they came because off of the relationship with me. And I had to show my boss and them that these kids are here not because of this program. They're here because of me. They're here because of the relationship that I built. They trust in me that I'm going to give them the things that they need. And so through that, we were able to get some other youth that came in, and to see my relationship with them, because even those youth were standoff, like, I don't really know you, but I'm trying this program out. But then they seen the relationship that I had built with the other kids, and how we reacted to each other. And it's funny because thank gosh, I've had my girls, almost the same girls since I started my program in 2018. And 2 of them are in college, and my program goes from 12 to 24. For those who don't know, I'm Tasha Barter Johnson. I work for New Voices for Reproductive Justice, and I run the Sister Speak Youth Project. And it's from 12 to 24, and I've had the girls since 2018, and they're like, well, we're not leaving. You said till 24, we're gonna be here till we're 24. So I'm like, to me, that was a testament to me. And I was like so excited this year, because losing 3 of my girls to college, I was like, here I go again, letting everyone know. And I sat everyone down, like, so this is another restructure year, because I need to go out and build relationships with other youth and in other spaces, and to get more people here. So, but I feel like after they seen it, they started to understand that building relationships was the biggest part of being able to keep this group going. And they allowed me to do that. They allowed me to build relationships. And I also wanted to speak on the food. That was very, very important. I couldn't have a conversation, whether they had a relationship with me or not, when my kids were hungry. when they didn't eat, they don't like the school food, or maybe they had something else to do during lunchtime, so they couldn't even eat lunch. So they're sitting there and I'm wondering, like, what's wrong? Why is y'all energy down? I know y'all just got out of school, but what's going on? Because they have no gas in the tank. They ain't ate all day. They've been going in and out of classes. So it was like food was like very, very important. And my wife is a basketball coach. And I would discuss with her, like, she like, oh, they were just didn't want to do anything today in practice. And I was like, they're probably hungry. So when we start bringing fruit and bringing something that they can put in their stomach before y'all have practice, because they're probably hungry. And when you're hungry, you can't think past anything, and you don't know how you're going to react to stuff. You might, something might really just upset you. And now we're working on, because you're upset, and they're focused on your on the behavior and not focused on what made the behavior. Why is this person upset? Why can't they understand? So the two things, relationship building and food, were the two things that I brought with me that I said, we are going to have this no matter what. So we did a whole bunch of talking and a whole bunch of, just building relationship with each other, and a whole bunch of eating. And that is the one thing I ask my girls every year. What is something from group that you want to stay, and what is something from group that you don't? One thing was definitely surveys. They were over surveys. They were tired of doing them. We're tired of doing these surveys. So let's try to figure out a different way for you to know what we want. But they wanted the food. They were like, we like when we sit down as a family and we eat and we talk over the table. And that's how we run our group. And they wanted that to stay. So those things were very, very key important. And I brought the stakeholders in. I recorded some of our sessions so that the grant people can see exactly what it is that I'm doing. Like, come join us. Because when y'all actually come, you see they get quiet. They don't participate because they don't know you. So they don't want to open up with a bunch of strangers in the room. So now you see, when you're not in the room, how the group runs, what we do. So it was very beneficial that way.
Another thing that I found helpful, because grants often have these reports, that want a lot of documentation, great photographs. They want metrics of, what did the kids learn? How many of them learned a new skill? All these things. And so, as opposed to always having them do surveys at the end, we just would ask the question and have kids raise their hand if it wasn't a very personal question, and we just count. And that was a really quick way for us to have metrics after every session. That took 2 minutes. But also I really called on my colleagues so that I didn't have to try to be taking photos, which already feels kind of invasive to these kids, that they're on, they're so public in this way. But I would have my colleagues come in so they could take photos, so I could focus on the kids and I could focus on relationship, so that the kids knew that my entire energy was going towards them. And then, yeah, there's this person taking photos. But when I used to do it, tried to do both those myself, just everything you were saying, you just can't focus on the kids. And they really feel that, and they respond differently when you're trying to do multiple things at once, and they don't care about grant reports. They have no idea why it's so important that you're getting all this documentation. So yeah, I think calling on my colleagues was really helpful, just asking somebody to stay after work for 10 minutes for the program and take some photos.
I'd like to add too, because we do know that grant reports matter. Unfortunately, I was about to curse. But one thing that I started doing that I really appreciate some of my colleagues that pushed me to do this was start, whenever we actually do the surveys, asking the question, did you feel heard? Did you feel respected by the person that was there, right? And making sure that those pieces weren't missed, right? That like, did you feel like you were part of a community during this meeting or whatever? Like, those pieces are so essential, and everyone's about, we got to measure. It's like, cool. Like, we're gonna measure how much they learn, but we're also gonna measure how heard and how, because, like, I'm not gonna lie, a lot of times I think I might just be a bad teacher because they don't remember a lot of stuff I talk about, and I'm okay with that. But I'm in the 99.9th percentile when it comes to that, asking if they felt respected and heard in my room. You better believe ain't nobody going underneath at least agree to strongly agree, because I know that's what I'm putting first in any group I'm in. And I'm fine with that. They learned half one thing, what felt heard and respected. I feel like I did my job beyond what anybody else can tell me about. You know what I mean? So I think not being afraid to ask those questions and remembering how important it is to ask, so we can let them know, like, this is getting done. Like, we're doing this.
Yeah, I love this conversation. I think it's so crucial. And I think about this on all the levels, right? I think, like, building relationships and trust with, like, in the program with the kids we're working with, but that's also how I think about these collaborations across, like systems and organizations and groups, right? Is that, real deep change that we're talking about is going to move like at the speed of relationships, and that relationships move at the speed of trust. And there are really good reasons that individual kids don't trust people, and there's really good reasons that some organizations won't trust researchers, and there's really good reasons that some communities don't trust. It's like there's distrust for good reason, and so we have to be like building trust and rebuilding trust and earning that, and like expecting that that's how movement's going to happen. And I think that for me, as again, like kind of coming in from the university as a researcher, like I come in knowing that people shouldn't just trust me. I should earn their trust, right? Like I should show up, and like people, I have to earn that as a white woman in the space, as a researcher in the space. Just like when I work with kids shouldn't just trust me because I show up and say I'm the grown up in the space. Like I have to demonstrate to them that I'm going to earn their trust. And I think that, we don't talk about this enough in the work. And and when it comes to grants, like we need the money, but also, I think like these foundations have all this money because like old dead white dudes took the money out of the community in the first place. And now it's like we have to beg for it back to go back to the community. And then you have to like prove that we use the money wisely. Like the whole system's problematic, but it's the system we have to work within at the time being. But it's also, I think, they find those ways to like push against that, right? And it's something that I think, and sometimes as a researcher, I'm positioned to sort of what does this foundation really, what information do they really need, right? Like we need to be pushing them to say, do you actually need that level of documentation, right? Like maybe you need to trust that organization is using the money in the way they know that it needs to be used, and like, let that work happen. But I'll stop there.
No, I like that. And I would say, I think to that point, if you have academic partners, use them to your advantage to help you get some of those things done, to help you like get some of the, funding agencies off of your back. Because I think sometimes we're in a good position to be able to like speak the language and give them, some numbers or something that they're looking for, but really contribute in a way that frees you up from the administrative sides of the things that you have to do. And so I certainly would challenge my community partners, definitely put me to work, because if there are things that I can do to help you be free to build those relationships, to address their basic needs, that's what we want to do.
I just want to say real quick, Dr. Ashley, I do definitely use you and your statistic. I wrote in the group, I wrote in your thing yesterday that I'm the one that's still using the Sisterhood 2.0. I know you couldn't see the chat, but the lady had made, I'm using it, and I let them know what the statistics and where it came from, and y'all run with that, but just know that when they ask me what my curriculum is. So I thank you guys for all of that, because it has been such a help. Same with you, Dr. Brittany, like both of y'all have just been such a help. And when it comes to like, what are we doing, or what the curriculum, or who the people are that we're working with, when we can put your guys' names down and we can say that we're collaborating with y'all, it does take a whole load off of the itty bitty details that sometimes they want that we may not necessarily have as the ones who are running the group or building these relationships. So I appreciate y'all greatly. And Jose, my kids love you. They already know who it is. So if I say we're partnering with Mr. Jose, they just love it. They think he has the corniest jokes ever, but they're funny, and they really get in tune. So I appreciate all the collaborations that I have with you guys.
It's true. All the kids love Tasha and Jose.
Funny's my favorite compliment. I'm really just working on my stand-up career through these kids. I'm working on my material.
Your dad jokes.
I'm wondering what other folks are kind of pointing at as far as like barriers and things that are getting in the way of one, the collaboration, but just even collaborating with others through their expertise, and even collaborating with the youth and bringing their expertise into the work that we're doing in a more effective way. I know Zoom.
Okay. I was like, I don't want to be the only one to talk, but I did learn something that I think it took me like a year into this program to learn. But I used to say uplifting the youth voices, and I was brought into a circle where they said that uplifting was more of a savior complex, and we needed to center And when I started to look at it that way, it helped me to bring the kids in more, and not what I thought needed to happen for them or what I seen needed to happen, but actually centering them in everything made it a lot better to help them, because I listen to them. I sit and I let them talk and I take in what they said. So it was very, very important to me. So I always like to say that, like, between uplifting and centering, I say centering way more, because that's really what we need to do.
The other one I used to hear a lot was like giving the youth a voice. I'm like, they had a voice? What do you mean giving them a voice? You ain't giving no kid a voice. Apparently you ain't been around kids. They've been, no. They, you just listen. That's all you did. I know one thing that comes a lot too for me is working inside of schools, that the schools aren't structured to center youth, which is like, and it's looked at as, you're being extra, you're not focused on academics, you're not, and I'm like, that's as if anything you do with somebody isn't working on their academic career, in my opinion. I feel like if you're exercising your mind, you're working on your academics, right? If you're playing the flute, if you're playing the piano, if you're playing hand games, whatever it is, you're you're working it out, right?
Yeah, schools have definitely been a barrier when we talk about barriers with getting the youth. School has been, that's why I was like very beneficial of you guys program, Jose, because I got to come into the schools through you guys, because me just trying to come into the schools as a reproductive justice organization, it was a lot of questions. What are you going to do? What are you going to teach? How are you going to say it? What exactly? Can you add this to it? So it was a lot of back and forth with the school. So we were blessed to be able to get on that end, coming in through another program that had already been able to get into the schools. So it's definitely a big barrier when it comes to trying to reach youth in the school systems.
It's a shame. I feel like I had to hustle to get into schools too, because the principals don't talk to you, the superintendents don't talk to you. I had to reach out to the educators that were and that understood the worth and understood what the kids needed, because usually administration don't hear it. It's strange too. I feel sometimes having a program that don't cost nothing sometimes gets less respect in the program that they got to pay for. They're like, oh, it's free. It probably ain't. It probably, who's giving out free stuff for kids? It probably ain't worth. It's like, no, it's we got the grant. That's why we got it free. But it's a shame. That should be our greatest collaborator, right? And it's one of the biggest barriers.
And I do have to say that, Dr. Brittany and Jose have been working tirelessly for a very long time to try and make change at the school level locally. Interestingly, I've been able to come in and sort of benefit from all of the hard work that you all have done, and benefit in the sense of my involvement hasn't come at the same level of, difficulty that you all have experienced in the past. So, I was able to come in and work closely with, the director of health education and kind of come up with this survey. Now, has that been an easy process? Maybe not, but that level of engagement and communication wasn't even there before. And that happened because of how hard you all and consistent you all have been to try to break down some of those barriers. So the progress is happening slowly, but it is happening. And it's definitely a result of the hard work that the BGA has been putting in, and the consistency at the PPS level.
It makes me think too, not even just so much different expertise that people bring to it, but even just, for lack of a better word, like the props for the cash, like where people are coming from. You know what I mean? Like, I feel, I can get myself into a classroom, talking my stuff or whatever, but trying to do something on a PPS wide thing, like I need a Dr. Hill and a Dr. Brinkman, and I need UPMC behind it, right? Tasha's coming out of New Voices. New Voices does such great work, but New Voices in that area of reproductive justice and working in reproductive health, things like that, y'all ain't getting the same money and same recognition. And it helps to have y'all's name on things, but also I know a lot of times y'all need the UPMCs and the Pitts and the other universities behind it to give it credibility, even though you might have that street cred, but the streets don't be paying like that, at least not for what we're doing. You know what I mean? So sometimes even just having those collaborations, just to have like, look, it ain't just Jose just kind of, you know, trying to, you know, slide his way through here. It's like, this is what other people are saying too. This is what other people are supporting. And like, I do try to come with data, and I do try to come with, you know, like that, like when I'm saying relationship first, it's not just like, because I feel it in my heart, although I do feel it in my heart. But studies have shown, you know, we have the data to show this, you know, and having people coming from academia and things like that to be able to back that up really does help give it that credibility, which is unfortunate that is needed. So it's, you know, it's kind of like colonial white supremacist thing of like, you know, who are you to say this is the right thing to do? And it's like,
I agree. We got a notice on the time, so we have a couple minutes left, and then there's a short break, and then there will be sessions again at 2:30. Does anybody have any questions? It's cricket. Well, if you would like to continue this conversation, I know Jose and I have mentioned a couple of times that we co-lead the Health and Wellness Working Group, and so that's at 2:30. The different working groups, BGA working groups, are all going to be meeting. So hopefully you'll participate in one of them. It's okay if you don't come to ours; you can always come to ours at another time. One of the things I love about BGA is that we do sort of work in these separate groups, but there's so much overlap because really what we're doing is I think what you said, Tasha, is like spot on, right? It's like centering girls. And so we know that, like, you know, we sometimes have to divide these tasks to get things done, but ultimately girls' lives are not like separated, right? Like going to school or thinking about their health and wellness are not separate things. So we encourage you to join one of the groups, come join ours if you want to continue talking more and talking about projects that we're going to be taking on and some goals for the upcoming year. Thank you all for being here.